Welcome, everyone. We are very excited this evening to welcome Brad Aronson, who is the author of Humankind. I encourage you to get a copy of the book. I'm going to give you just a little brief bio. And first of all, I want to give a shout out to the Jewish Book Council, with whom we partner. And it is through them that we're able to bring great authors like Brad to speak with us. And I know we're going to have a great time learning from Brad and hearing about him tonight. So just very briefly, Brad, as you already know, is the author of the national bestseller, Humankind, Changing the World One Small Act at a Time. And his book is, well, it starts with his own story, which I'm sure he'll share a little bit of it with us. And then he shares a real life stories of people who have been in their both small and large ways, making a difference in the lives of others. Forbes said it's the most uplifting and life-affirming book in years. When Brad is not writing books, he is deeply involved in youth nonprofits. He's on the boards of a number of organizations, including Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and HopeWorks. He also teaches entrepreneurship to students in Camden, New Jersey. Everyone in his class starts their own business, which has led to many adventures in entrepreneurship. I encourage you to get the book for two reasons. One, it's a great read. And all the proceeds from the book go to Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Brad lives with his family in Philadelphia, and we are very excited to welcome Brad to Temple Emanu-El tonight. So all yours, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Thanks for having me here. I grew up in Livingston, New Jersey, and I've been to many bar and bat mitzvahs at Temple Emanu-El back in the day. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about the book, and then you'll have a chance to ask any questions you want, and I'll do my best to answer them. I want to start by asking everyone to think about someone you're thankful to have in your lives. So maybe they did something small for you. They called you up to see how you're doing. They dropped off a meal, or maybe they did something huge that changed your life. But let's just take maybe 15 seconds right now. Just think about that person that we're really thankful to have in our lives. All right, now I'm going to do something a little bit risky for the start of a presentation. I'd like everyone to take out their phone or pull up an email and send a quick note to that person. Now we're only going to have a minute, so it should be really short. I'm really thankful you're in my life. Thank you for being a great friend, something like that. This is the time when my wife realizes I'm giving a presentation because she gets a random email from me. But let's all, right now, we'll just kind of take a minute and send that really short text or email message. All right, this is the 15-second warning. All right. So if you're not finished, I'll ask if you could kind of put it aside. This is the risky part, but I know we can do it and finish it after the presentation. So thank you. What's pretty great, I feel, is that in under 5 minutes, we all just made someone's day. And if you're like most people, you probably feel great about it. Like, how awesome. Each of us has the power to make someone's day, and we can do it every single day. There's a lot of research about habits. And if you want to create a new habit, it's easier if you couple it with an existing habit. So what if every morning after we ate breakfast, we sent a note to one person, letting them know that we were thankful to have them in our lives? And if we spent 15 minutes and wrote a handwritten note, we'd be sending something that someone would hold on to forever. We're in a world where people are suffering all around us, and the news only amplifies the stress. It can make it difficult to figure out what to do. It can feel paralyzing. There's so much wrong, and things are so unfair. How can I make a difference? I believe that the way we change the world is with our small acts, and that's the premise of my book. There were two main inspirations for my book. The first was the graduation of a mentee of mine. She went to a high school called Girard College. And even though it's called Girard College, it is actually a high school in Philadelphia. And at her graduation, I was sitting there, and on my left-hand side was a 70-something-year-old man. And he told me that he graduated from Girard, and it changed his life. So every year, he comes down from New York to be at graduation to support the next generation of graduates. On my other side, on the right, was a woman who was crying. And she told me she was crying because she thought her daughter would be dead or in jail. And here she was graduating. And there's a part in the ceremony where you sing the school song. And at this point, the 70-year-old guy next to me stands up and starts belting it out so proudly. Then the commencement speaker gets up and he talks about how incredible this is. The students at Girard are from areas of Philadelphia where it's expected many of them will drop out of high school and very, very few will go on to college. Yet every single graduating student had been accepted to college. And he went on to say that unfortunately, these students are inheriting a world that's very negative. And in the news, so often you only see the negative. And that's why, he said, tomorrow you won't see anything about Girard in the news. So of course, I wake up the next day, I get online, I look everywhere. I go out and I get our daily newspaper, the Philadelphia Inquirer. I look through the whole thing, not a single mention of Girard. And it was so disappointing for me. I felt like I got to witness a real live inspirational movie. I was like in the audience, I felt great. And I knew that with all the negativity out there, if other people knew this story, they would be uplifted, they would feel happy. And I thought, if I want to see these stories out there, I should start writing them. So I started writing about these kind acts and people and places and organizations that inspired me. And my next inspiration came about 6 months later. So 6 months later, my wife, Mia, she had noticed a lymph node that was swollen and went to the doctor and found out that she had leukemia. And we were told that you need to go to the hospital immediately. And if you're lucky, you'll get out of the hospital in 30 days, and then you'll have 2.5 years of outpatient chemotherapy ahead of you. And outpatient chemotherapy was basically going back to the hospital 4 or 5 days a week for hours of treatment. And, we're going through this treatment. We made it through the first 30 days. And then we're a few months into the outpatient chemotherapy. And the nurses suggested we go to a conference for young cancer patients and their caregivers. We were hesitant to go. We felt like every day we're in the hospital dealing with cancer. We didn't want to spend our weekend at a conference to talk about cancer. But anyone who's been through a health scare, you know that the nurses get you through it. They're unbelievable. And we thought that if they think this is a good idea, we should do it. At this conference, one of the speakers had been through the same treatment as Mia. And she said, if you have 2.5 years of treatment ahead of you, you need a project. A project gives you a distraction. It gives you a purpose. It gives you something to do with the hours and hours that you're spending in the hospital. So that night at dinner, we're discussing projects, and Mia decides that she's going to write in a journal or draw a picture every day. Our son Jack was 5 at the time. He's a diehard Phillies fan. He decided he would play 200 days of wiffle ball in a row. We became the US Postal Service of wiffle ball. Rain, sleet, snow, we were out there, and he's wearing his Phillies hat. He has a little Phillies necklace, his wristbands, jersey, socks, shorts, everything. And I don't know if you follow the Phillies, but that was their best season ever. They won 200 games in a row, obliterating whatever team I was representing that given day. For my project, I decided to write about the small acts of kindness that helped us get through treatment and this experience. I had always been a volunteer and someone who gave to others. I was awful at accepting help. People would come up to me and they'd say, like, what can I do for you? I'd say, I'll get back to you. And I never did. I was so frazzled. But luckily, people just stepped up and started doing things. So my brother and his wife came over and they dropped off bag loads of things. And they said, we talked to a bunch of physicians, we talked to cancer patients, we did research online. This is everything we heard you might need for chemotherapy. Use what you want and donate the rest. My wife's friend Dawn called at one point. She said, Brad, it is Little League sign-up week, and I know Mia probably does it, and Jack loves Little League. I'm going to sign him up, and I'll get him on a team with a friend who could drive him back and forth to practice, because I know you're at the hospital all the time. We live in Philadelphia, as you know. Philadelphia is a big city with a big Little League. It's 100% run by volunteers, and too few volunteers to do it. And they have a very reasonable policy that you cannot, under any circumstances, request to be on someone's team. Well, Dawn got Jack on a team with his friend. And it was such a blessing for us because I didn't have to tell them what was going on in our lives. They just took him back and forth to all the baseball stuff so I could spend more time in the hospital. There was my cousin Betsy who called. The 30 days when Mia was in the hospital happened to be during Jack's winter break from school. And at his school, you get 2 weeks off. And I was really just stressed out because I was going every day to visit her in the hospital. And I wanted to go every day. And he would sometimes come, but when he came, she would put on her wig. We would meet in the lobby area and she'd like use all of her strength. So he couldn't really tell what was going on. But if he came with me every day, he'd see the other patients in her area and he'd get a better feel for the severity of this situation. Well, my cousin Betsy called and said, I found this camp. You could send your kid to camp over break. And every day he would do gymnastics and I'd pick him up at the end of the day. It was amazing. So I signed him up. She calls me a day later to see if I'm excited about it. And I told her we didn't get in. There's some sort of rule about the staff to camper ratio. And they were at the maximum campers, so they couldn't even squeeze Jack in. And she said, I'm going to figure this out. And the next day she called me and she said, Brad, Jack's going to camp. I talked to the other moms, and we're all donating our days at camp so Jack could go. Betsy was the only mom I knew. Most of these other moms were working moms. And that meant that they were going to have to miss days of work to take care of their kids. It was unbelievable. As good karma would have it, some random kid dropped out of camp and no one had to give up their days. But that kindness was so touching. We had neighbors who would call, hey, Brad, I made an extra vat of chicken soup. Can I bring it over? My neighbor Vicky had the nicest way of asking if she could bring us groceries. She would say, Brad, I'm going to Trader Joe's. What can I get for you? It wasn't, do you need anything? Can I pick something up? I'm already going. What can I get for you? Writing about all these small acts of kindness changed my perspective. When Mia was first diagnosed, we met with all these doctors and they would look at her and they'd look at the charts. They'd say, this is really strange. Like, you're so young and you're so healthy. People like you don't usually get this type of cancer. And when you hear that, it just amplifies this voice in your head that's saying, why me? Why is this happening to my family? How come my wife, who's so nice and so kind, has all these questions about what's going to happen to her. And she has 2.5 years of treatment. How come our son, who's an innocent, sweet 5-year-old with an engaged mom, is going to have her pulled away for 2.5 years? Best case scenario. But when I wrote about these kind acts, I realized how lucky we were to have these people in our lives. I was reliving these acts and it made me feel more positive. Don't get me wrong, I wished we weren't in that situation, but it helped shift my perspective a little bit to why me, to being able to see the positive. And that really helped us get through that experience. And I want to let you know, because I know that you haven't read the book, my wife is healthy. She made it through treatment. We hit all our milestones. We are so lucky, so lucky. Of course, we didn't know this at the time. Now, I felt so good writing these stories that I decided I would also write other people's stories about those moments when a seemingly trivial act of kindness has this ripple effect, changing sometimes thousands of lives. And I'll share some of those stories with you. One story is about Jimmy. So Jimmy grew up in Flint, Michigan. And when he was in 3rd grade, all he wanted to do was fly under the radar and not be noticed. But it was hard for him. For one thing, Jimmy was the only kid in the 3rd grade who went to school with his shoes tied in a huge jumble of knots. And that's because Jimmy was the only kid in the 3rd grade who couldn't tie his own shoes. And he was horrified that his shoes would come untied and he'd have to ask his teacher for help. So his parents tied all these knots. And the reason Jimmy couldn't tie his shoes is because he had one thing that made him different than all the other kids. He had only one hand. And it was hard for him. Kids would tease him and call him Captain Hook. One student in his class cried on the first day because they thought his hand was so scary. So obviously he could not, no matter what he tried to do, fly under the radar. One day when he gets to school, he gets to his classroom and his teacher, Mr. Clarkson, is standing outside of class. And he says, "Jimmy, I figured it out." And he says, "What'd you figure out, Mr. Clarkson?" He says, "I'll show you." So Mr. Clarkson turned on a movie for the class, turned out the lights, and dragged 2 chairs into the hall. And he taught Jimmy how to tie his shoes with one hand. Decades later, Jim says, I don't know if it took him 30 minutes or hours to learn how to tie his shoes with one hand. But the fact that Mr. Clarkson did this was an inspiration and a turning point in my life. It's when I realized I could do anything I wanted to do. And Jimmy wanted to play baseball, so he practiced every day and played. He wound up pitching for the United States Olympic team and leading us to a gold medal in baseball. Then he went to play an exhibition game in Cuba, and the Cuban fans were crazy about their team. And Jim's pitching, and he has one hand, so you put your glove under your armpit, you pitch, you got to get your glove, field the ball, put it back, throw the ball to first base. Not an easy thing to do. The first 3 batters hit it to him on purpose because they think he's not going to be able to field it. And he got them all out. And the fans started cheering like crazy for him and booing their own team. And he went on to play professional baseball. Of course, this is Jim Abbott, who played for the Yankees. He pitched a no-hitter, which is a huge achievement. He also wrote a best-selling memoir, it's called Imperfect. It's an amazing read. And he went on to raise money and support lots of children with disabilities. And he said when he started playing baseball, parents started showing up at his games with kids who had disabilities. And they were trying to show their kids an inspiration and encourage them they could be what they wanted to be. And he would meet with them. So he did meet and greets. He tried to meet with every family. He said he received hundreds of letters a week. And he and one other guy at the ballpark answered every letter. He said it was because he knew how far a little encouragement could go. Well, one of those kids that he reached was Nick Newell. When Nick was 6 years old, his grandparents took him to a Yankees game. And then he got to have a meet and greet with Jim Abbott. And Nick told me, this was amazing. This was the first time in Nick's life he ever met anyone else who had only one hand. And here, this guy with one hand pitched for his favorite baseball team. And Jim told Nick, you can do whatever you want to do. And Nick wanted to be a wrestler. And when he got to high school, he decided to wrestle. He lost his first 17 matches by getting pinned. And in case you don't follow wrestling, getting pinned is the absolute worst way to lose a match. But he got progressively better. And by his senior year, he was an all-state wrestler who had school and state records. In college, he was the captain of his wrestling team. And he started training in mixed martial arts. He lost his first mixed martial arts competition, but won his next 13. And he loved mixed martial arts. And he applied to compete in the UFC, which is the highest paying and most well-known mixed martial arts competition. And the person who runs it, Dana White, said, "It's hard enough to compete here with two hands. I'd be crazy to let someone compete with one hand." So Nick joined a different league and became a world champion. And Nick told me that as he became well-known, parents started seeking him out. And they wanted advice, like, how can I encourage my kids who have a disability? And he told me he meets with them all the time. And Nick also regularly goes and talks at events for kids who have lost all or part of an upper limb. And Nick's a busy guy. So he's young. He has a young kid. He started his own gym where he trains people, and it's a fledgling business he puts a lot of time in. And he still competes in mixed martial arts. But he told me he always makes time, and he's always meeting with these families and talking to them. And I said, what inspires you to do that? And what do you tell them? And Nick told me, he said, when I was 6 years old, Jim Abbott wasn't too important to talk to me. And that taught me that I'm not too important to talk to anyone else. And when I meet with these kids, I tell them, you can do whatever you want to do. And sometimes I teach them how to tie their shoes with one hand. Mr. Clarkson saw that Jim was bothered about his shoes. He didn't know it would have this giant effect. He just saw a need and took that opportunity to help. And it had these ripples. And I love stories like that. In writing the book, I also love sharing stories about when people found something that we might assume can't turn into a positive, but they figured out how to do it anyways. And I'm going to share two quick anecdotes from Ronald McDonald camp. This is a camp for kids with cancer and their siblings. I was a counselor here for a few years. It's an overnight camp. My first year, the kids with cancer need a lot of medicine. So at night, you get all the kids from your bunk together who need medicine, and you go up to the wellness center. Well, the kids generally hate taking their medicine. It makes their hair fall out. It makes them feel sick. It makes them sometimes throw up. They don't want to take their medicine. So it's not like my first night at camp, like, oh my goodness, no one wants to go get their medicine at the wellness center. I go up there. It is pitch black. And all there is this giant disco ball. It's spinning around, and the music's so loud. The whole place was vibrating. I thought I was going to get a headache, but the kids loved it. And they said, you can't get your medicine unless you dance for it. And the kids are dancing out there, and they're having fun. And every night after that, the kids wanted to go get their medicine. I would have never thought you could make getting medicine that makes you feel sick fun. But thank heavens, the staff at the wellness center said, why shouldn't we make it fun? My other example from Ronald McDonald camp is also from my first year. It's an overnight camp. So when you get there, you get there before all the campers, you unpack your stuff. And I noticed that one of my bunk co-counselors, Jim, he had brought a leaf blower. So I'm thinking, all right, Jim must be like really into being clean. He's going to leaf blow our bunk every day or something. And I go, Jim, what's with the leaf blower? He says, oh, I use it to wake up the kids. They love it. I'm thinking, all right. I mean, it doesn't sound fun to me, but we'll see. So you get to the first day of camp, and part of that first day, you sit down all your campers and you go through the rules. So you can't touch anyone's stuff. We're not going to exclude people, all that type of stuff. And then Jim holds up his leaf blower and he says, guys, if you don't wake up in the morning, I'm going to leaf blow you. And the kids are like looking at each other, like, is he for real? And they look at me and I'm like, I think you're going to get leaf blown. So at camp, we have this tradition. It's called a polar bear swim. We wake up the kids really early. We go up to the pool and we jump in. Some kids love it. It's an adventure. Other kids hate it. They don't want to get out of bed. And the pool was actually a little bit cold in the morning. It's up in the Poconos. It's cold in the morning there. By middle of the week, not a single kid would get out of bed for polar bear swim. But it wasn't because they didn't want to go. They all wanted to be leaf blown because it was so fun to have this windstorm in bed. And after they were leaf blown, we'd go up to the pool, we'd jump in, and not a single kid complained. Jim had changed the whole tone to make it fun. And I've tried to learn from that. I try my hardest when things are not fun to say, how can I make it more fun? I'm not always successful, but I try, and sometimes it works. I remember at one point, our son just hated making his bed, and we would always clash because I feel like you have a job, you need to have a job and do it. And he just didn't want to make his bed. So I wound up telling him, tie your sheet around your neck and run down the hall. Now run and dive on your bed. Now do it with your blanket. And this is how superheroes make their beds. And we had a theme song to play while he made his bed. And that was one of the successes. I like sharing success stories about making it fun. Now, of course, kids are the best at seeing things from a different perspective. Sometimes I think because we've lived so long, we think things are the way they are and that we're not going to change them. But kids, they see it differently. One of my favorite examples is Gabriel, who I got to meet his family and talk to them and share their story. So when he was 6 years old, his mom, Natasha, was putting him to bed. And she said, Gabriel, November 3rd is coming up, and it's a sad day for me. You're doing great. Everything is okay, but it's a sad day, and it will always be a sad day. So a few years back, Gabriel had been diagnosed with a disease on November 3rd, and he had gone through treatment. He was cured. He was better. But for Natasha, there's always a sad day. And Gabriel said, Mom, why can't we make it a happy day? Why can't we make it like Secret Santa Day? Here's their family history about Secret Santa. When Gabriel was in treatment, someone left gifts on their porch for Gabriel and his sister. And there was a card, and the card just said, from Secret Santa. And Natasha had hung that up on her fridge. And she told me that almost every day they talked about that. And they talked about how amazing it was that someone did this anonymously, that they didn't even know. And that next year, they decided they would be Secret Santas. And their tradition was that Mom, Grandma, and Gabriel would pick out people they thought needed a boost, and they would leave presents anonymously on their porches. And he said, let's do something like that on November 3rd. And Natasha said, all right, well, let me make a video, and you can tell me what you're thinking. And he said, November 3rd is a day of darkness, and I want to turn it into a day of light. So I'm asking everyone, please do something nice on November 3rd for Gabriel's Day of Kindness. And Natasha sent this out to a dozen friends and family. And one friend said, would you please post this on a Facebook page? That way, if we do something, we could, type in what we did and share it. So of course, Gabriel starts going nuts. Oh, this is going to go global. Everyone's going to do it. And Natasha's trying to set his expectations. We only told 12 people. A lot of people, when they do good deeds, they don't publicize it because they're not doing it for the publicity. They had asked everyone, if you do a kind act, please give someone a card and say you're doing it for Gabriel's Day of Kindness. And we'd like it if you would pay this kindness forward. And if you want to learn more, here's the website address. So the day comes. They live in Boston. The first act came from Wisconsin. Then it came from Florida. And soon it spread to all 50 states in the US. And then it went to Armenia, France, Czech Republic, for a total of 56 countries. Now, of course, Gabriel's family also participated. They went to the hospital where he was treated and gave out toys to kids who were there. They handed out gift cards to people who were homeless. They put flowers on people's porches. They went to the bank that had been really helpful to their family when Gabriel was in treatment and gave them donuts. They went to a restaurant, paid for dinner at another table, and asked the waitress to give him the Gabriel's Day of Kindness card and explain that's why dinner was paid for, and watched as table after table after table paid for dinner. Until finally Gabriel's dad said, we can't stay here all night, we gotta go home. And when they got home, Gabriel said, Mom, is it still a dark day? And she said, no, it's not. This was a great day. He said, Mom, can we do this tomorrow? She said, no, we cannot do this tomorrow. And he said, can we do it next year? She said, yes, we can do it next year. And that's how Gabriel's Day of Kindness came to be, where now it's this day where across the globe, people are doing kind acts because Gabriel wanted to turn a day of darkness into a day of light. And Natasha shared that so far, 7 families have reached out to her and said that they've created their own days of kindness so they could turn their child's diagnosis day into a more positive day. So I want to share another example. This one is about how a little bit of money can go a long way. And it's the story of Hilda Back. Hilda and her family were Jewish, and they grew up in Germany during World War II. So obviously, when things got started, their family was in huge danger. And people in the community were really upset about what was happening. But they didn't know what they could do. They weren't going to stop the German army. They weren't going to change the government. And they thought maybe they could get enough money together so that Hilda and her family could escape to Sweden, where Jews would be free and Jews were safe. And Hilda was, thanks to them, able to escape to Sweden. And she became a nanny to a family and then became a kindergarten teacher. And Hilda always wanted to give back. And she said that because people helped her when she came to Sweden, she especially wanted to help people in other countries. And one of the ways she found to do this was a nonprofit where she could pay for the secondary school education for a kid in Kenya. Because in Kenya, primary school is free, but secondary school costs $45 a year, which means if you're in poverty, you drop out of school because you can't afford it. And she donated $45 a year. Her donation wound up supporting a kid named Chris Maburu. And Chris told me that in his village, everyone was so poor. There wasn't running water, there wasn't electricity. And once people were done with primary school, they worked in the fields next to their parents. And if you got sick, there wasn't enough money to get health care. If you were out of work for too long, your family went hungry because there just weren't enough people working. But because he had this scholarship, he did really well in secondary school, and he went on to college. He went to University of Nairobi, because even though secondary school costs money, college is free in Kenya. And then he got a scholarship to Harvard. And when he graduated Harvard with a law degree, he became an international human rights lawyer for the United Nations, working in genocide, not even knowing Hilda's background. And he told me that when he went back to his village, he felt so guilty because his friends were in poverty, working in the fields, and he saw no future for them. And he told me he didn't think he was smarter than them. There just weren't enough scholarships, and he was one of the lucky kids who got one. It was pure luck. So he started a nonprofit to support other kids in Kenya getting a secondary school education. He had never met Hilda, but one of the early letters he got from the nonprofit mentioned her name. So he named his nonprofit the Hilda Back Education Fund. And so far, that fund has paid for 900 children to get a secondary school education, which pulls the child and the family out of poverty because the jobs are so different that you can get with a secondary school education. And he really wanted to meet Hilda. And Chris wanted to tell her what her legacy was. So he petitioned the Swedish embassy, got her contact information, went to Sweden and met her. And he told me that she became a second mom to him. He would visit her at least once a year. And it was a long trip for him to get there sometimes. And she came to his village and was made a tribal elder, which is a huge honor. And his ripples have continued. So he tells me that his funding, a lot of it comes from students who got scholarships, that he'll get money in the mail from them. And they'll say, now that I've got a job, I want to give back so another student can get a scholarship. And 2 of the students who received their education through Chris's nonprofit started a nonprofit in Mombasa. Mombasa is Kenya's 2nd largest city. Their nonprofit pays for students in Mombasa who are in poverty to attend secondary school. And it continues. Kathleen Ismail, she's a woman who was in Ghana, and she told me that when she heard Chris and Hilda's story, she decided that she was a normal person just like Hilda. And if Hilda could do this much good, so could she. So she set up a nonprofit to provide scholarships so that kids in Ghana could attend secondary school. And her nonprofit provided 200 scholarships. Fortunately, Ghana wound up making secondary school free. So now Kathleen sets up computer resource centers in high poverty areas because people don't have access to resources. And she provides scholarships for higher education. It was interesting that in an article, Hilda said, I always wondered what happened to that $45, if it just evaporated. How lucky for her that she got to find out how far it went. So what can we do? How can we make a difference? There tend to be plenty of opportunities in our own circles, and I want to mention a few ideas. First, especially now, we all know someone who's going through a rough time. The easiest thing we can do is be there for them. So often we're not, right? We think, well, it might be awkward if I talk to them. I don't know what to say. Or maybe they don't want to talk about it. I'll wait for them to bring it up. Because my book is about small acts of kindness that have transformed lives, I got to talk to hundreds of people who had really difficult things happening to them before these acts of kindness. The only thing every one of the people I interviewed and spoke with agreed on was that being seen, knowing that someone saw them and cared, made a huge difference. And I saw this myself. When Mia was in treatment, we got a note. And the note, it was an email. It said, Dear Mia, my daughter is in your son Jack's class. I heard what's going on. And I just want to let you know that you have another parent in your corner rooting for you. This note brought us to tears. If you had showed me this note before Mia had cancer, I would have said, oh, like, that's really nice. Having gone through it, I know that when things are difficult and your emotions are so high, a note like that can make all the difference. In an amazing coincidence, by the way, the woman who wrote that note was a member of Temple Emanu-El's congregation. I just found that out when recently. And it's Jill Maderer, who's now a rabbi in Philadelphia, but she was actually a member of your congregation. All of us can send a note to someone going through a rough time and say, hey, I'm thinking of you. And along those lines, there's a synagogue in my area, and they told me how they bake bread, and they just deliver it to members of the congregation they think could use a boost. And they told me they couldn't believe how appreciative people were. They're only giving them a loaf of bread. And what they realized is these people were so happy that someone thought of them and that they were there and that they were seen. So that's, it's opportunities where we can do something small that makes a huge difference. Something I saw and I heard from a lot of people that I interviewed, but not everyone, is that there's a whole group of people who are, it's difficult for them to accept help, right? You say, what can I do for you? And they say, I'll get back to you, I don't know. And often it's helpful to just do something, to show up and shovel their snow, to clean their bathrooms, drop off food, just be there and do it. And especially like remembering people over time is important. So you have a diagnosis, you have a death, you have something serious that happened, and there's this outpouring of support at first. I think my Aunt Leslie set a calendar reminder because every 2 weeks we'd get a letter from her. Hey, just thinking about you. It's you wouldn't believe what your cousins did this week, and you wouldn't believe what I did, and your Uncle Fred, oh my goodness, Uncle Fred. And she never talked about cancer, but we knew she cared. We knew that she was thinking about us, and it made a huge difference. I think if every day we walk around and say, how can I make someone's day today, right? We don't need to change the whole world, but how can we make someone's day today? How can we help them? How can we see that kid who's having trouble tying their shoes? How can we make a small donation? How can we send a thank you note? It's the embodiment of the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, that we should repair the world with our actions. And I think it's important to not only help the world, but to be open to receiving help. Like I know firsthand how hard that is. I said no way too much, but it's a gift to let people help us. Something that gave me this realization is when a friend said, I want to help you. It would be really nice if you would let me. And then I thought, wow, I'm not actually impositioning them by accepting help. I'm allowing them to help me, and I like helping other people, So I should allow this, and I do need this help. It's a gift to me and to them. And it also shows our son Jack that it's okay to accept help. So those are just some thoughts. Before wrapping up, I want to mention a few organizations, and I will send I'll put the URL in the chat before I end. I put a bunch of these online. There's a section in the book called Hall of Fame where I list organizations where they can find ways where we can give back. A few that I thought were especially nice. One is Foster Care to Success. So when foster kids go to college, they often don't have an adult in their life anymore. Because you're going to foster homes, you get out of the system and you're in college, and it's really stressful. So I teach kids, a lot of them have been through foster care, and the ones who go on to college, sometimes they'll come to me and they'll say, I am so nervous. What do I do when my roommate asks me about my family? I don't want to tell them that my parents are in jail and I grew up in 10 different foster homes. They're going to school with a whole level of stress that other students don't have. And in many cases, not a single adult they can call for advice. Foster Care to Success pairs adults like us with these kids, so they have someone who's going to encourage them. There was one case where a girl heard this young woman, there was a $200 discrepancy. And because of it, the bursar's office was going to, have her get kicked off campus. And she didn't understand the financial forms. But someone with more experience who could kind of step in and help got her through that situation. They also have a fun program. If you like to knit, my wife loves knitting. For Valentine's Day, they give every student a hand knit scarf. And it's amazing. The students say, so a lot of them say, this is the first handmade gift I ever got. And when I'm walking on campus and people say, where'd you get that gift? You say, someone gave it to me. I mean, it's really awesome. If you love seniors and feel for them, because some are alone and they can't see anyone, you can send letters to Love for Our Elders, and they share those letters with seniors. They send it to different seniors. There's Cards for Hospitalized Kids that does it for kids. And what's interesting is there's about 4 or 5 different charities that do this for kids. Almost all of them were started by someone who, when they were a kid, they were in the hospital, and the cards made such a difference to them that they wanted to set up these nonprofits. And the last one I'll mention is One Simple Wish. This website is where social workers post things that their kids who are in care, maybe foster care, they need. Because if you're in foster care and you want to play a sport, there might not be the money to buy the equipment or to get music lessons or to get a birthday gift. And you can go on their site and contribute $1 towards a wish or contribute $5 to a wish. So there's lots of ways we can give back. And I think what's important, one of the things that's really important is to realize that we won't know the impact we have. So many of the stories in my book, there's Ricardo, a single conversation changed his family's entire life. And I asked him, I said, Ricardo, what do you do when you see this guy who changed your whole life? And he said, at the time, I had no idea this conversation was going to change my whole life. He was a stranger. Every day I'd look for him on the street so I could hug him. And in the meantime, I do a kind act every single day. And it was amazing how many of the people who I talked to in the book and who I interviewed told me that they have no idea who did this for them. Like for one person, it was a gift they got from one of these programs for kids who would otherwise not get holiday gifts. That gift changed his entire life. He'll never meet that person. They just, heard from their temple. Someone needed a gift and they wanted a guitar and they brought it in and it went to the kid. So you never know the impact you have. And in Hebrew school, I was taught about tzedakah and the importance of giving anonymously, which is amazing. And I believe in that, but it makes it difficult to know the outcomes. And I think it's important to realize we might not know the impact we have on the world, but just like writing that note of thanks that we did at the start of this evening, we know the impact it has on ourselves. And that's important. I want to thank you for listening. And hopefully you found this interesting, maybe inspiring, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Brad, thank you so much. That was a really wonderful presentation. I could tell how engaged people were when I was looking at their screens as you were talking. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box or use the reactions button on the bottom of the screen to raise your hand. And while those are coming in, I'll get us started with a question. I noticed that in many of the stories in reading the book, Brad, there were people who served as mentors and really made a difference. And those aren't small acts of kindness. Those are big acts of kindness. So I was wondering if you could talk for a minute or two about the importance of mentoring and the role it can play in someone's life.
Mentoring is so important to me personally. It's why I chose Big Brothers Big Sisters as the nonprofit to donate the book proceeds to. It's shocking the number of kids that don't have an adult role model or might not have enough adult role models. And what you see is that with that guidance and someone saying, you can do it, and someone supporting them, and also someone they can call before they make a really bad decision, makes a complete difference. And it doesn't have to be a love story. There's a guy, Jackson, who's a friend of mine. And when he was young, his mom killed his dad, and he and his siblings wound up living in a trailer with grandma. And, he was in trouble at juvie and things were going badly. And he got a mentor, this guy, Alex. And Jackson said he didn't even like Alex, but Alex told him he could succeed and showed him another avenue. And that's why Jackson believes he's successful. And now Jackson runs a nonprofit that helps kids in Philadelphia. And he says everyone owes it to Alex. And that's not to say that you're not going to like the person you mentor and they're not going to like you. But it doesn't have to be as big a commitment as you think it is. And I think also it's just looking around, right? We're going to see people who are having a difficult time. And mentoring is often just reaching out to them and saying, hey, I see you're going through something. Can I be helpful? And maybe it's listening, maybe it's coaching, but there's opportunities all around. And I think everyone could use an extra mentor.
Thank you, Brad. If there are any more questions, please looking to see if anyone has a hand raised or put them in the chat box. One question, Brad, is the book is one story after another, one amazing story after another, and they're from all over the country. And how did you find all of these stories? Like, how did you collect them?
So, once I started writing stories and posting them online, people would email me. And then I started asking everyone I knew when I was with them. I'd say, hey, was there a small act of kindness that changed your life? And I was shocked at the number of people who had one. And one of my favorite stories is I was with my friend Alex, who is a friend of mine since grade school. And I was with he and his wife. And I asked his wife, and she's like, oh, well, Alex every day, every weekend spends time helping this older man who has Alzheimer's and changed his life completely. And I was like, Alex, did you do this? He goes, yeah. I go, how come you never told me? He's like, well, I just did it. It's not something I tell people about. And so much of the time, that's what I found. And then I got to talk to this man's family and hear how amazing Alex was and how he changed their lives. So when I asked people, I just found there were so many stories that are out there that people don't talk about.
Okay. So, Brad, when did you start thinking about that all of these would become a book? I mean, was this your pandemic project? Was this your version of sourdough?
No, so it actually wasn't a pandemic project. The book was finished before the pandemic. I love sharing good news and I love inspiring stories. And I had tons of time in the hospital when Mia was going through treatment. So I was kind of putting it together and I kept going. Interestingly enough, the book was released right at the start of quarantine. And I called my publisher and I said, we should release it some other time. Like all the bookstores are closed. Everywhere I'm supposed to go, I'm not going to be able to get there. And the publisher said, "Good, guess what? We got other authors. They have other dates. Your book's coming out. We don't care. Not we don't care, but like there's nothing we can do." And to think, like even before then, I was concerned because it was coming out April 14th. And I said, it's the day before taxes are due. Everyone's gonna be distracted. They said, don't worry. Then all of a sudden there's this giant pandemic and everyone's in quarantine. I'm like, oh no, there's like, don't worry. It turned out to be a wonderful time because people really appreciated hearing these stories and realizing that we might see all this bad around us, but we can make a difference every day with a small act. We don't have to change everything at once.
So I can't resist but asking, since this book came out, since you wrote it before the pandemic, is there another book coming?
So, I haven't yet. I don't know yet. I'm planning to write another book because I love writing books. It turns out that the writing is one part of it. Actually getting people to learn about your book and read it is the whole other part of it. And that's the part that I'm in now. So there will be another book, but it's not quite formulated yet.
Great. One of the stories that really, there were two very different stories that stood out for me when I was reading the book. One was about Howard Lutnick from Cantor Fitzgerald, and that's such a powerful story. And then there's another story, and I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. Is it Markeisha Poindexter? Marquita Poindexter. Two totally different stories, but both really, when I was reading the book, those really stood out for me. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about those stories with us.
So, yes. Oh my goodness. I mean, I love those stories. I kind of love all the stories. I got to really know all these people. They're amazing people. I mean, Marquita, when she was growing up, she was in a very bad family situation. So she wound up in foster care and she had bad foster parents and ran away. And when you run away from foster care, you wind up in juvenile jail. And she was there a couple times. And at one point, she's in jail and Mr. Riddick, who's the warden, comes to her room and says, Marquita, you need to come to the conference room. And the only time you go to the conference room is when you have guests, the police are there, or you're in serious trouble. She never had a single visitor, so she knew she had no guests, and she thought she was in trouble, and she says, I'm not going. He says, you have to go. And she's like, I didn't do anything. I swear I didn't do anything. He's like, you have to go. And she's really disappointed. She gets there, and there's a big ribbon that says, Happy Birthday, Marquita. And the warden's wife had made her a strawberry shortcake, which was her favorite cake. And the jailers had gotten her some gifts, some braiding hair and some music. She said it was the first birthday she ever had in her life. Shortly thereafter, she was transferred to a facility in Virginia because if you run away too much, they send you to another state because you don't know anyone to run away to. You don't know that community. And when she was there, she became a leader. And she told me she pinned one of the birthday cards up. And she said that was the first time she realized like people care about me and I could be someone. And she was the one who always got in fights at jail, outside of jail. And she said that's just how she expressed herself. And she stopped. And because she'd done well, she got sent back to Philly. And she decided she wanted to help kids like her. So she got an associate's degree. And then she got a college degree. And now she has a counseling degree. And she counsels at-risk kids. And she's saving money and raising money to start a house for homeless young girls so that she could help them. And in her house, she has this Bible that she keeps. And she said, this Bible was a gift from the warden's wife, and I'll never forget it. And it's amazing. Oh my goodness. And I found out this story because someone at the school where I was teaching knew Marquita. And like, I asked her, like, you know anyone where something changed her life? She's like, you got to talk to Marquita. Her 16th birthday party changed her whole life. And the story about Howard Lutnick. So when Howard was at Haverford College, his mom had passed away already. His dad died while he was in school. And it was his first week of college, and he was at home, and he got a call from the president of Haverford College who said, "I'm sorry that your dad died. We've got you covered. We're paying for your education," which was completely different than his sister, who was in college and was told, "You should get a job so that you can pay for your education," by her school. And Howard said that, his family, he didn't even have family kind of reach out. So the school had done this gift for him. And he went on to become CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, which is a large financial services firm. And in 9/11, hundreds of his employees, I think over 600 of his employees, died in 9/11. And at that moment, he had no way of reaching them. All of their backup files were in the basement of the World Trade Center, which had just come down. And he, on the news, said, if you work for me, we're going to do this phone conference. And he said, I want to start the company up again. The only reason we're going to start it up is to help the families of our loved ones. Because he believed that you should hire people you like. He had his best friend work there. I forget, there's an enormous number of sibling pairs who worked there. The security guard was the brother of someone who worked there. So it was like family. And in seeing how people came together to help them was amazing. So they had this site in Jersey City where they were trying to rebuild their technology. And Microsoft flew out, I think it was 30 people, to break into their own computers because they had lost all their passwords in the basement. Cisco, who was a partner of theirs, drove 27 tractor trailers of gear, so when they needed gear, they could run to a tractor trailer and get it. And they rebuilt their company and were able to provide compensation to his employees who had lost a loved one. Were able to provide health benefits on an ongoing basis. And now every year they donate their revenues from 9/11. It's either revenues or profits, I can't remember exactly, but it's an enormous amount of money on that date to some nonprofit. And he said the reason he did that was because of what Haverford did to him. Like, in that moment, he remembered what happened to him and said, I need to pay that back. It's an amazing guy.
Wow. Thank you, Brad. So we've heard stories on a grand scale and stories on a very small scale. And unexpectedly, we even found out that we had the opportunity today, just earlier, to make a difference in someone's life by just sending them a text or an email. So I hope we all took away something from Brad's book about how we all can make a difference. This was so inspiring, Brad. If there's any last questions, let me know, or we will. Thank you, Brad, for joining us this evening. I think everyone who was here had a great time. This was time really well spent. So we appreciate it. And like I said, I encourage you to read the book if you haven't yet. So thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again next month, when we'll be having our next Jewish Book Council author talk. So thank you all. And it was great to see all of you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Brad.
You're welcome.